In the heart of the Zamando kingdom, where the sun blazed like a wrathful god, the village of Kayamoyo, once a thriving oasis of baobab trees and golden millet fields, had become a skeleton of its former self. The earth cracked like a widow's lips, and the river Wazi, once teeming with fish, now hissed with the heat of dry stones. Children's laughter had been replaced by the hollow coughs of the sick, their ribs pressing against skin as thin as parchment. The elders gathered under the tree of ancestors, their faces etched with fear. "Nyami Nyami is punishing us," muttered Chief Duma, his voice trembling. "We took too much from his waters." The river spirit's wrath was legend. It was said he could swallow entire villages in his serpentine coils. Desperation drove them to Mama Jabali, the blind seer who dwelled in the mountains of whispers, where the wind carried secrets of the dead. Mama Jabali's cave reeked of burnt sage and crow bones. She listened to their pleas, her milky eyes rolling back as she channeled the spirits. "The curse can only be broken," she rasped, "by binding life to death. A pure-hearted youth must wed the oldest soul in the land." Gogombeki. The villagers recoiled. Gogombeki was a relic of nightmares. She lived in a hut deep in the forest of whispers, surrounded by jars of unnameable things. Some claimed she had outlived her children, her grandchildren, and even the trees themselves. Others swore she lured lost travelers into her home and drank their youth like wine. The Sacrifice of Kwame. Kwame was a boy of 16 summers, with eyes like molten amber and a smile that could coax honey from bees. Orphaned by the famine, he cared for his younger sister Amma, whose legs had withered from the sickness. They lived in a hut patched with animal hides, surviving on wild roots and the kindness of stray dogs Kwame fed scraps to. When the village elders came for him, Kwame was mending Amma's tunic. "You must marry Gogombeki," Chief Duma declared, flanked by warriors clutching spears. Amma wailed, clutching her brother's leg. "Do not take him. He is all I have." But the chief's voice was iron. "Refuse, and the hyenas will feast on your sister's bones tonight." The wedding was a grotesque spectacle. Villagers gathered in the dust, their faces masked in false celebration. Kwame wore a tunic stitched from funeral shrouds, his cheeks streaked with tears. Gogombeki arrived swaddled in a cloak of crow feathers, her gnarled fingers clutching a staff topped with a human skull. She chuckled, a sound like termites gnawing wood, as Kwame choked out his vows. That night, the villagers shoved him into her hut, bolting the door with a log. "Sleep well, bridegroom," they jeered. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of rotting herbs and animal fat. Gogombeki sat on a bed of hyena pelts, her milky eyes glinting. "Come, husband," she croaked. "Let me taste your fear." Kwame pressed himself against the rough mud wall of the hut, his heart pounding like a war drum. The air was thick with the scent of burning herbs and something darker, something that smelled like decay and forgotten graves. Gogombeki rose from her bed of animal hides, her bones creaking like the branches of an ancient tree in a storm. Her milky eyes locked onto him, and though she was blind, Kwame felt as though she could see into the very depths of his soul. "Your tears are sweet," she hissed, her voice a rasping whisper that sent shivers down his spine. Her breath reeked of grave soil and rotting leaves, and Kwame gagged as she shuffled closer, her gnarled fingers reaching out like claws. "But they will not save you." Kwame's mind raced. He thought of Amma, his sister, alone in their hut, her frail body trembling with sickness. He thought of the villagers who had forced him into this nightmare, their faces twisted with desperation and fear. He thought of the stories he'd heard as a child, stories of witches who stole the breath of the young to prolong their own wretched lives. As Gogombeki's claw-like hand grazed his cheek, the hut shuddered. The ground beneath Kwame's feet seemed to tremble, and the walls groaned as if alive. A gale screamed through the cracks in the mud and thatch, extinguishing the fire in the hearth and plunging the room into darkness. Kwame's scream caught in his throat as Gogombeki's body began to twist. Her spine crackled like dry kindling, and her leathery skin split like overripe fruit, revealing a glowing, otherworldly light beneath. Kwame stumbled back, his legs giving way as he fell to the floor. He watched in horror as Gogombeki's form dissolved into smoke, the air filling with the acrid stench of burning flesh and sulfur. When the smoke cleared, Kwame blinked, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. Standing before him was no longer the hunched, ancient crone he had been forced to marry. Instead, there stood a woman of breathtaking beauty, her skin like polished ebony, her hair a cascade of midnight waves that seemed to shimmer with starlight. Her eyes burned like twin suns, their golden light piercing the darkness. "I am Naledi," she said, her voice a melody of sorrow and fury, each word resonating with a power that made the air hum. She stepped closer, her movements graceful and deliberate, like a predator stalking its prey. Kwame scrambled backward, his back hitting the wall. What are you?" he stammered, his voice trembling. Naledi's gaze softened, and for a moment, Kwame saw a flicker of pain in her radiant eyes. "Centuries ago," she began, her voice carrying the weight of ages, "I was a priestess of the River Kingdom, a guardian of the sacred waters and the secrets of the spirits. I was beloved by my people, revered for my wisdom and my connection to the divine." She paused, her eyes distant, as if reliving a memory long buried. "But I was also young and foolish. I fell in love with a warrior from a rival tribe, a man forbidden to me by the laws of our people. When our love was discovered, he was sentenced to death. I could not bear to lose him." Naledi's voice broke, and for the first time, Kwame saw tears glistening in her eyes. "In my desperation, I committed an unforgivable sin. I stole the sacred drum of Nyami Nyami, the river spirit, hoping to use its power to save him. But the drum was not meant to be wielded by mortal hands. In my ignorance, I unleashed Ikubo, a demon who feeds on despair and thrives on the suffering of the living." Kwame's breath caught in his throat. "Ikubo?" Naledi nodded, her expression grim. "The elders of my tribe, in their wrath, bound Ikubo's essence to my soul. They cursed me to age eternally, my body withering while the demon lay dormant in my shadow. For centuries, I have lived as Gogombeki, a shell of the woman I once was, waiting for a pure-hearted soul to break the curse." She reached out, her hand hovering just above Kwame's cheek. "Your tears," she whispered, "were pure enough to shatter the chains that bound me. But in freeing me, you have also awakened Ikubo." As if on cue, a deafening roar echoed through the village, shaking the very ground beneath them. Kwame rushed to the door, throwing it open to a scene of unimaginable horror. The once quiet village of Kaya Moyo was now a nightmare come to life. Shadows slithered through the streets, their forms shifting and twisting like living smoke. Villagers ran screaming, their faces contorted with fear and madness. A child, no older than Amma, stood in the middle of the chaos, laughing as she clawed at her own face, her fingers leaving bloody trails. An elder collapsed to the ground, his body crumbling to ash before Kwame's eyes. Above it all loomed Ikubo, a towering figure of darkness with hollow eyes that seemed to swallow the moonlight. His mouth, filled with jagged teeth, stretched into a grotesque grin as he fed on the despair around him. Kwame turned to Naledi, his voice trembling. "What have I done?" Naledi's eyes burned with determination. "This is not your fault, Kwame. The curse was mine to bear, and now it is mine to end. But we must act quickly. Ikubo grows stronger with every moment he feeds." She grabbed his hand, her grip firm yet gentle. "Come. There is a way to stop him, but it will require great sacrifice." Kwame hesitated, his mind racing. He thought of Amma, alone and vulnerable in their hut. He thought of the villagers, their faces twisted with fear and pain. And he thought of Naledi, a woman who had endured centuries of suffering for a love that had doomed her. With a deep breath, Kwame nodded. "Tell me what I must do." Naledi's eyes softened, and for the first time, Kwame saw a glimmer of hope in their golden light. "We must journey to the Cave of Echoes, where the Drum of Dawn lies hidden. It is the only thing that can seal Ikubo away. But be warned, the drum demands a life in exchange for its power. Kwame's heart sank, but he squared his shoulders. Then let's go. We don't have time to waste. As they stepped into the chaos, the shadows seemed to part before Naledi, her radiant presence a beacon of light in the darkness. But Kwame couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was only beginning and that the price of saving the village might be more than he was willing to pay. Kwame and Naledi stumbled into the night, the air thick with the stench of burning thatch and the acrid tang of despair. The village of Kayamoyo, once a place of laughter and life, had become a living nightmare. Shadows writhed like serpents, twisting around the huts and trees, their forms shifting and merging into grotesque shapes. The villagers were no longer themselves, mothers clawed at their own children. At last, they reached the heart of the cave. The chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in shadow, so high that it seemed to stretch into infinity. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and ancient decay, and the walls pulsed faintly, as if the cave itself were alive. The ground beneath their feet was uneven, littered with jagged stones and bones that crunched underfoot. The only light came from the faint glow of the drum of dawn, which sat atop a pedestal of skulls in the center of the room. The pedestal was a grotesque masterpiece, its base formed from the bleached remains of countless skulls, their hollow eye sockets staring blankly into the darkness. Some of the skulls were human, their jaws frozen in silent screams, while others were animal, their horns and fangs adding to the macabre display. Atop this grim foundation sat the drum, its surface etched with ancient runes that glowed faintly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the walls. Naledi approached the drum, her expression solemn. Her golden eyes reflected the drum's faint light, and her radiant form seemed to dim as she drew closer. "This is it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The drum of dawn has the power to seal Ikubo, but it demands a life. I must be the one to pay the price." Kwame's heart ached as he watched her reach for the drum. Her hand trembled, and for the first time, he saw fear in her eyes, not for herself, but for him. "No," he said, his voice breaking. "I won't let you do this. You've suffered enough." Naledi turned to him, her gaze softening. "Kwame, this is my penance. I unleashed Ikubo, and it is my responsibility to stop him. You have already given so much, your freedom, your tears, your hope. I cannot ask you to give your life as well." Kwame stepped forward, his fists clenched. "You're not asking. I'm offering. You've lived for centuries, carrying this curse. You've suffered enough. Let me do this. Let me make it right." Before Naledi could react, Kwame shoved her aside and seized the drum. His hands trembled as he pounded on its surface, the sound echoing through the chamber like a thunderclap. The runes on the drum flared to life, their glow intensifying with each strike. "Take me," he screamed, his voice raw with desperation. "Take me instead." The cave roared, the walls shaking as if the earth itself were protesting. The drum split open, releasing a swarm of shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. The shadows coalesced into the form of Ikubo, his towering figure of smoke and teeth looming over them. His hollow eyes glowed with malevolent glee, and his jagged mouth stretched into a grotesque grin. "Fool," the demon's voice boomed, shaking the very foundations of the cave. "You've given me a second curse." Kwame's scream turned to stone as his body began to petrify. His limbs hardened, his skin turning gray and cold. His eyes froze mid-rage, and his body became a statue of grief, his face forever etched with the pain of his sacrifice. The shadows receded, and the cave fell silent, the drum's glow fading into darkness. Naledi collapsed to her knees, clutching Kwame's petrified form. Her tears fell like golden rain, each drop sizzling as it hit the stone floor. "Why?" she wept, her voice breaking. "You were not meant to pay for my sins." The silence of the cave was deafening, broken only by Naledi's sobs. She cradled Kwame's stone face, her fingers tracing the lines of his frozen expression. "You were so young," she whispered. "You had so much life ahead of you. And now you are gone." As she knelt there, the weight of centuries pressed down on her. She thought of the warrior she had loved, the man whose life she had tried to save, only to doom them both. She thought of the countless lives Akubo had destroyed, the villages he had ravaged, the despair he had spread. And she thought of Kwame, the boy who had shown her kindness, who had wept for her, who had given his life to save others. "I failed you," she said, her voice barely audible. "I failed them all." But even as she grieved, a spark of determination ignited within her. She could not bring Kwame back, but she could honor his sacrifice. She would carry his memory with her, a reminder of the cost of her actions and the power of selflessness. With a deep breath, Naledi rose to her feet. She gently laid Kwame's petrified form on the ground, arranging his stone hands over his chest as if in repose. "Rest now, brave one," she said softly. "Your sacrifice will not be in vain." As she turned to leave the cave, the shadows seemed to part before her, as if even they recognized the weight of her sorrow. The journey back to the surface was long and arduous, but Naledi pressed on, her heart heavy but her resolve unshaken. When she emerged from the cave, the village of Kayamoyo was silent. The fires had burned out, and the shadows had receded, but the scars of Akubo's rampage remained. The villagers wandered aimlessly, their faces blank and their eyes hollow. The demon was gone, but his mark lingered, a reminder of the cost of their survival. Naledi walked through the village, her golden eyes scanning the devastation. She saw a mother clutching her child, both of them trembling with fear. She saw an elder sitting in the ashes of his home, his face streaked with tears. And she saw Alma, Kwame's sister, curled up in the dirt, her frail body shaking with sobs. Naledi knelt beside Alma, her heart breaking as she took in the girl's hollow eyes and trembling lips. "Your brother was brave," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "He gave his life to save us all." Alma looked up at Naledi, her small frame trembling like a leaf in a storm. Her eyes, once bright with the curiosity and mischief of childhood, were now hollow, filled with a mixture of grief and anger that seemed too heavy for her frail shoulders to bear. Her lips quivered as she whispered, "Why? Why did he have to die?" The question hung in the air, sharp and unrelenting, like a blade cutting through the silence. Naledi felt the weight of it press against her chest, stealing her breath. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. What could she say? How could she explain to this child that her brother's death was the price of a curse she herself had unleashed centuries ago? That his sacrifice was the result of her own mistakes, her own desperation, her own love that had spiraled into tragedy. Instead, Naledi knelt beside Alma, her golden eyes shimmering with unshed tears. She reached out, her hand trembling as she brushed a strand of hair from the girl's face. Alma flinched at first, her body stiff with anger, but then she crumpled, her small fists clutching Naledi's tunic as she buried her face in the warrior priestess's chest. "He was all I had," Alma sobbed, her voice muffled against Naledi's shoulder. "He promised he would never leave me. He promised." Naledi's heart shattered at the raw pain in the girl's voice. She wrapped her arms around Alma, holding her tightly as if she could shield her from the world's cruelty. "I know," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I know he did." Alma pulled back, her tear-streaked face twisted with anger. "You were there, weren't you? You were with him when he, she couldn't bring herself to say the words, but Naledi understood. "Yes," Naledi admitted, her voice heavy with guilt. "I was there." "Then why didn't you stop him?" Alma demanded, her small hands balling into fists. "Why didn't you save him?" Naledi flinched as if struck. The truth burned in her throat, bitter and unrelenting. "I tried," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But your brother, he was braver than anyone I've ever known. He made a choice, Alma. A choice to save us all. Alma shook her head, her tears falling faster. I don't care about saving everyone. I just want him back. Naledi's own tears spilled over, tracing golden paths down her cheeks. She pulled Ama close again, her voice trembling as she spoke. I know, little one. I know. And I wish I could bring him back. But some choices, once made, cannot be undone. For a long time, they sat there in the dirt, clinging to each other as the world around them seemed to crumble. The village was silent now, the fires extinguished and the shadows gone, but the scars of Ikubo's ramage remained. The air was thick with the scent of ash and sorrow, and the weight of loss pressed down on them like a suffocating blanket. Finally, Alma's sobs subsided, leaving her exhausted and limp in Naledi's arms. The girl looked up at her, her eyes red and swollen. What happens now? She asked, her voice small and fragile. Naledi hesitated, her mind racing. She had no home, no people, no purpose beyond the curse she had carried for centuries. But as she looked into Alma's eyes, she saw something she hadn't felt in a long time, a reason to keep going. Now, Naledi said softly, we honor your brother's memory. We live, Alma. We live because he gave everything to make sure we could. Alma's lower lip trembled, but she nodded, her small hand gripping Naledi's tightly. Will you stay with me? She asked, her voice barely audible. Naledi's heart ached at the vulnerability in the girl's voice. She thought of Kwame, of his kindness, his bravery, his selflessness. She thought of the life he had given up, not just for the village, but for her. And she knew, in that moment, that she could not abandon the one person he had loved most in the world. Yes, Naledi said, her voice firm despite the tears in her eyes. I will stay with you. For as long as you need me. Alma nodded again, her grip on Naledi's hand tightening. He would have liked that, she whispered. Naledi smiled through her tears, though the weight of her guilt and grief remained. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. The village was broken, its people scarred by the horrors they had endured. And the